Hello everybody, I am Jmulls of Jmulls Gaming, and I have a series on this channel where I react to your hot takes. I've done it for Xenoblade, I've done it for Final Fantasy XIV, but I think it's only fair that if I ask you to come to the hot seat and provide your hot take not only for myself but the world to react to, it's only fair if I give my hot takes as well. I have quite a few, but I want to spend this video talking about one in particular, because it concerns the characters of Final Fantasy XIV, and I think after Dawntrail, that has become a bit of a hot topic. And from my experience, making videos about Final Fantasy XIV Dawntrail, and watching content surrounding Final Fantasy XIV Dawntrail, and hearing a lot of different opinions and perspectives, not just on Dawntrail, but overall, I do think this is a hot take, at least to some people. And that is, I don't think bad characters have to remain as bad characters. What do I mean by this? I'm going to be talking about Wuk Lamat, because personally, I'm not a fan of the character in Dawntrail. I don't think Wuk Lamat was well told, I think the dialogue was subpar, yada yada yada. We've talked about that before. We don't need to rehash those elements to it. To me though, I don't think it necessarily is a bad thing if she comes back in the story. What do I mean by this? I tend to find, not just when it concerns a character like Wuk Lamat or anything, just overall in general, when a lot of people make an opinion about something, it can be really hard to get them to change their mind. And this is especially true when it comes to characters or just story beats. A person's first impression can sometimes be their only impression, and it can cloud any future utilization of that character or story beat in the future. Now, I'm not going to try and act as if someone's wrong for thinking like this. It's your interpretation, it's your enjoyment at the end of the day. You're entitled to enjoy the things you like and to dislike the things you don't. Nothing wrong with that, I just think it's a bit of a limiting mindset. There have been characters in 14 where I haven't been their biggest fan initially, but over time, they managed to combat my preconceptions, and through extensive character development or iteration or plot reveal, I came around to really enjoying that character and really liking them in the story. Characters like Elidibus, even Laha Breya, or even characters like Gaius. These are characters when they were first introduced, I thought they were okay at best. They didn't move the needle much for me, they didn't really impress me. But over the time, and as their character development continued to happen, or they revealed more and more about the characters, I came around to liking them. I thought Gaius himself in A Realm Reborn was really bland and kind of one-dimensional. He was just kind of the insert bad guy here, but he had a bit of a redeeming quality to him. Where I really came to appreciate him and grew to like him so much was later on in places like Stormblood and Shadowbringers, like in the Shadows of Warlet storyline. When that happened, I came to really like the character. And we came to an element where I thought, I question a lot of people's media literacy when we got to Shadows of Warlet, because a lot of people called it a redemption story, whereas to me it was mostly Gaius suffering the consequences of his previous actions, but being able to react to them with his new mind frame and mindset, and trying to be a better person. That's what I got out of Shadows of Warlet, instead of it being a blanket redemption story. It was another example of character development that I really came to appreciate from Gaius, and I came to really appreciate that character. Now, I did mention Wuk Lamat. I think it's no surprise to anybody who has kind of had their finger on the pulse of the community with Dawntrail that Wuk Lamat is far and away the most polarizing character. You have people who either really love her, and then a lot of people who really dislike the character. I fall in the camp of someone who dislikes the character of Wuk Lamat, not necessarily for the actual plot beats or story beats for the character, but everything surrounding it. Mainly the dialogue and the way that Dawntrail is written. And by putting Wuk Lamat in this main character role that she was in, it's putting a lot of the weight of responsibility for telling the story of Dawntrail on her shoulders specifically, because she is put in this position of the shonen protagonist. She is put in this position to have so much dialogue in comparison to everyone else. And when you take that and couple it with the dialogue being far less nuanced, as it was in places like Stormblood or Heavensward, let alone Shadowbringers and Endwalker, you have dialogue that is far more tropey and in your face, lacking subtlety for the most part, and you have Wuk Lamat speak as much as she does, then the issues with Dawntrail's writing will become abundantly apparent mainly through that character, whereas the issues are more interwoven in the experience of the whole, in my opinion. This doesn't mean that I think the character can't be salvaged or redeemed in the future. Not in the way of a redemption arc, but just in terms of public perception to Wuk Lamat as a character. Reading a lot of opinions about Wuk Lamat, there's a lot of people out there who just never want to see the character again. And if we never do, I wouldn't be upset about that. However, I think it could be a missed opportunity. There's a lot of people that are negatively polarized against Wuk Lamat because, well, I think she was a detriment to the story, at least in the way that she was told. And I can understand not liking a thing, but I tend to find, especially with characters, if someone or people don't like the character, it can be really hard to get people to come around to actually liking the character. It can be a borderline Herculean task. And I don't envy the position that Square Enix is in right now, but for me, I think there are ways to get a lot of people to come around to the character of Wuk Lamat. I think it's important to bear note that a lot of extremely polarized discussion on the internet tends to be from fringe groups that aren't necessarily representative of the entire player base. That's not to say that I think public perception to Wuk Lamat is inherently positive, but I don't think it's as, like, world-endingly bad, like, borderline a war crime, someone called Geneva, that some people make Wuk Lamat out to be. Because the people most likely to talk about these really polarized topics and emotionally charged discussions on the internet are the people who are emotionally charged themselves and really care one way or the other about this any particular topic. And I just don't think that's representative of most people that just play and consume the game. This not only affects Final Fantasy XIV, but really any internet discourse on the whole. And it's something you always have to bear in the back of your mind and remind yourself of. Because I have to do it too. But for me, what would be the ways that Final Fantasy XIV could make people warm themselves up to Wuk Lamat? I think it's a really simple idea, at least in terms of just saying it. And I think that is tell a better story, right? Like, duh. What do I mean by this? For myself and many others, Dawntrail felt as if it was being written for a younger demographic than, say, Shadowbringers and Endwalker. That's not to say that those games were written for, like, 40-year-olds or anything like that, but when you're way more upfront and in your face with the type of humor they try to elicit in Dawntrail, it makes it feel immature. You combine that with it coming off the back of Shadowbringers and Endwalker and even the Stormblood patches, having lower stakes is not a problem, but the way they handled it was a miss in my opinion, and felt a bit too goofy and just too inconsequential for the most part when it concerned Wuk Lamat. It felt too cheesy and childish, and with a lack of interesting things to do until we got to Alexandria, I think it lowered people's impact when it came to Wuk Lamat. The way to fix this and remedy this is, in my opinion, drastically reducing the amount of screen time and dialogue that Wuk Lamat has, and moving her to a different role. At the end of the day, Final Fantasy XIV is a game where we experience the story through the eyes of the Warrior of Light. I don't think the Warrior of Light should ever just feel inconsequential or as if they don't matter to the overall story. They should feel like a character. I don't think Wuk Lamat should be the main character though. And I think a way that you could tell the story going forward, and the problem here is that we just don't know what they're going to do. We don't know what the direction's going to be. It could go in any direction. We don't even know if Wuk Lamat is going to be in the patches to a meaningful degree. It's entirely possible that I've said multiple times before and theorized that she takes the role of, say, Americ or, say, even Lys from Heavensward and Stormblood respectively, where they had a big story part and focus in their own respective stories, but once they concluded, we rarely ever saw them afterwards. And it was only when we came back to that certain part of the world that we had brief asides with these characters. They never returned in terms of the story prominence they once held, or once held. They never regained that former stature. That could easily be Wuk Lamat's main role going forward, where she's just kind of meant to represent this corner of the world with Tulialol. If the story brings us back there, we may have a cameo with her, say, hey, what up, and that's it. However, it's also possible, because of the way they've done Tulialol, they can always have Wuk Lamat come with us and leave Kona at home to give an excuse for why Wuk Lamat could be in the story going forward. Assuming that's the case, how could you make this character better? Well, drastically reduce the amount of screen time and portion of dialogue in comparison to everyone else that she has, and I think that goes a long way just by doing that. Combine that with better voice direction, in my opinion, on the whole, which I thought was lacking in Dawntrail, at least for English. But if you improve the dialogue and just the writing on the whole, I think that goes a long way. At least for me, I found Wuk Lamat far more bearable and even fine when we got to Alexandria, because while she was still a main character and had a lot of screen time and focus, it was kind of split between her and Sphene, and also Erenville and Erenville's mother. And I think by simply just doing that, it made Wuk Lamat far more bearable. Didn't make her a good character to me, but I thought it made her way more bearable than during the Rite of Succession, where it was just an onslaught of this one character. I don't think we'll ever escape a lot of people out there just being down on Wuk Lamat, even if the writing gets way better and more people come around to the character, because that is the nature of the internet. There's a lot of people out there that once they form an opinion about anything, it's very hard to get them to change their mind or to just change their perspective. For me though, while I don't like what they did with Wuk Lamat in Dawntrail, I don't think that means she has to permanently be a bad character for me. And I still think there's a story to tell with the Warrior of Light having this student character accompany them, to where they ask about our former adventures, what they can learn and take from that. Maybe even spar with us on occasion to try and get better in terms of their martial prowess. These are elements that I hoped would be there for Wuk Lamat in the Dawntrail storyline for 7.0, but to me were drastically lacking. They could be there in the future, or maybe another character eventually takes this role. Very similar in style to the Heavensward Dragoon questline, if you remember that one. For me, I just want to enjoy the game and I want to enjoy the story. Being overly negative all the time is not going to let me enjoy the story. It doesn't mean to have lower standards or to lower your standards for whatever reason, but if the story does improve to the point that I like it, I don't want to just allow my preconceptions or my opinions from yesterday to affect my opinions of today, overly so. And if they're able to truly salvage this character, then I would like to see that story. I would like to see that development, and I would like to see how they do it. I know this may not sound like a hot take to some of you out there, especially if you agree with my idea that a character that I once disliked doesn't always have to be a character that I dislike, and depending upon the writing in the future, could become a character that I do like and even love. There's a heck of a lot they would have to do for that to make me really love Wuk Lamat as a character of all characters, but I don't want to just completely write off the notion. But especially if you've been reading or listening to a lot of conversations surrounding Dawntrail, a lot of people act as if they just don't want to ever see Wuk Lamat again, and I can understand where they come from. If I don't ever see her again, I wouldn't really bat an eye. But instead of remaining pessimistic always with this negative slant to all my opinions going forward, I would rather be proven wrong. I would rather enjoy the game than not like it. And I think there's a thin line, right? There's a thin line between lowering your standards too much and allowing your perspective to change. Continuing to lower your standards just leads to eventually a worse product and a worse experience, with the lack of constructive criticism surrounding something. But at the same time, I think if you remain pessimistic and you remain inconsolable, and you don't let yourself change your perspective, if the story does get way better, and characterization and dialogue and writing on the whole gets way better, which has happened with this game before, and you force yourself to always be down about this one thing because it was bad at one point in time, I don't think you're doing yourself any favors, and I don't think, let alone the game, you're not doing yourself any favors here. Because in essence, you're robbing yourself of what could have been a pleasurable and enjoyable experience because you want to remain pessimistic and just continually down about something. Again, thin line between lowering your standards too much, or at all, and being open to something getting better. And with that, I think I'll call the video there for the day. Thank you all for tuning in. Let me know in the comments down below if you agree with me, if you disagree with me. And what would be a way that they could improve Wuk Lamat as a character for you going forward? Even if you like the character, what would you want to see out of the character? Or what would it take for you to like the character going forward? I'd love to hear your thoughts and hear your opinions and to hear your perspectives. Stay safe, have a great day, and I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye, everybody, till we meet again.